Hey folks, how's it going tonight? Hi. Thank you. Thank you all for being here at Cafe Scientifique. I can't believe that it is our second to last cafe of the season. Aww. How many folks in the audience have been to almost every cafe this season? That's great. Thank you so much for your support. It just means so much to us. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce our speaker now. Dr. Luis Escobar's research interests include macroecology and ecological niche modeling. Using climate and remote sensing data, he aims to investigate areas of potential invasion of micro, or disease, and macro fish species. His goal is to validate tools and theory from invasion biology into disease ecology to enhance the field of spatial epidemiology, which I imagine he might explain while he's up here. He also assesses methods and variables for assertive predictions of biological invasions in Minnesota freshwater ecosystems at coarse and fine geographic scales. And tonight he's gonna be, you're like, what does that have to do with bats? Tonight he's gonna be talking about bats. But the way that I was introduced to Dr. Escobar's work was because he was working with in the area of aquatic invasive species and presenting on modeling techniques that can be used in a variety of different ways, which I think, again, he may speak to somewhat tonight. And he was presenting to some folks at the DNR, and we actually have some DNR folks in the audience tonight as well. But he came very highly recommended speaking on the topic of bats. So I'm looking forward to introducing him to you, Dr. Luis Escobar, and he just got married. Like this week, so. And he's sitting next to his lovely wife, Joanna. So come on up, doctor.
Thank you for that cool introduction. My wife says that I love her, but my heart is with the bats. So, thanks for this invitation. It's an honor to be here. And please forgive my accent. I'm from Guatemala, so if you don't understand something, just raise your hand and I can repeat, even if I commit the same mistake. I work with bats. That's most of my background, and I have been studying diseases in bats. Bats are a very complex system, a very complex group, and because I have been gaining a lot of knowledge from that group, now I'm applying that knowledge to diseases in fish. That's why I'm here. Okay. At the end of the talk, you are going to understand what's the link between bats, between parasites, and Chikungunya is a novel disease, and Whitenose syndrome. And this is a picture of Batman and Superman. This is a new movie. So my goal here is that at the moment that you watch this movie, you are going to be from the side of Batman. Okay? Okay, let's see. Let's see if I can achieve that. This was my training in Guatemala. I'm from Guatemala, my wife also. And the idea was to work with the CDC, looking for novel diseases or novel pathogens in bats. So we were looking in healthy bats for potential parasites that can jump from bats to people. Okay, let's see. This is me, like some years ago, and we made some necropsies. Sorry for the pictures. Okay, there were some accidents sometimes. Okay. We use mist nets that are used to capture birds, but we use that for bats also at night. And it's very interesting because when you put the nets, it depends on the bat species to the time that we capture them. So they have different times to forage. And also it depends of the level in which they are flying, we capture them. For example, if we put the nets very high, we are going to capture insectivorous bats. But if we put the nets in the bottom of the floor, we are going to capture vampire bats. This is a vampire bat. We are going to talk about parasites in natural ecosystems. We are going to use bats as a model. We are going to talk about parasites in disturbed ecosystems. And then we are going to show the example of chikungunya in a disturbed ecosystem and the white-nose syndrome that is affecting bats. So in this one, bats are going to be the bad guys, and here they are going to be the victims. Okay, this is the type of animals, the kind of animals that my colleagues used to work with. When I was studying my PhD, they used to work with very fluffy and beautiful animals, while I was working with other group of animals. Yeah. Okay. So the goal here is that at the end of the talk, you are going to be loving the bats. Okay? There are some beliefs that are not correct. I remember that I heard this question in one of the talks a couple of years ago, and people think that some bats attacked, and when they are flying, they are stuck in your hair. People also, when you say bat, they immediately think in Dracula. There are some kids also that think that bats are blind, but they can see very well. Indeed, the flying foxes that I showed, the babies, they fly at day, so they have a vision like us. And others fly at night. All the bats that are in the Americas, they fly at night. And they have a very good view, a vision, and they also have echolocation. Not all the bats eat blood, so that's an incorrect belief. And they are not flying mice. And they are not bad animals. They are really cute, beautiful, nice animals. Okay, and this means this is a kind of book. So here we measure the distance of how familiar are the animal. So more distance, more different, or less history of evolution they have. And for example, in this group, we can find the bats, the horses, and the dogs. And you can see that, for example, humans are far from mice, from rodents, and bats are even more far from rodents. And this is what bats provides to people. We call that ecosystem services. For example, they eat insects, and a colony of bats in the US can remove per night 50 tons of insects. So they are providing a lot of services to the agriculture. They also eat mosquitoes. One bat can eat per hour 1,000 mosquitoes, but they don't eat 24 hours, like a couple of hours. So the species that eat mosquitoes is Myotis, and they are in danger now due to the white-nose syndrome. We are going to talk later about that. And they also eat nectar, and because they eat nectar, they have pollen in the hair, and they pollenize the flowers. What else? Indeed, there are some species of plants that co-evolve with bats, and the plant has exactly the form of the anatomy of the head of the bats. And they also eat fruits, so when they move between trees, they spread the seeds, and they provide this kind of service to generate the forests. Okay. If you want more information about bats, there is this link, but we are going to talk most of the things that are here. For example, that they they live a lot, and that they are not related to rodents. They are more close to humans than to rodents. This is a bat that is capturing an insect, and what they do is that they have some kind of skin here between the legs, and when they are flying, they capture the insect with that kind of net. I was mentioning echolocation, and what they do is that they emit a sound. This sound travel and crash with the insect, so the bat can know where is the insect, what's the speed, and what's the size of the insect. When it detects one insect, it's going to emit a lot of more frequent echolocation to know exactly where it is, and it's going to capture the insect. We are going to talk about coevolution, and that means that the species has been living together at the point that they know them. For example, there are some moths, these butterflies that fly at night, and when they feel the echolocation, they stop flying and they just fall. So the bat is not going to be able to identify where it is. This is a kind of family tree, and more far we are, less close are the species. And this tree is very cool because it shows the family of bat and how far they are, how similar they are. But most important, what they eat. I'm going to show you here what they eat. For example, this is a Desmodus rotundus, and they eat blood. This one is the bat that eats other bats or frogs or rodents or even birds. And this one, yeah, I always have problems with that one. Sorry. This one eats nectar, and this one eats fruits, and this one there are two species that eat fish. They have some claws in the legs, so they are flying very close to the water, almost touching the water, and they are going to capture the fish that is like swimming in the surface. It's very cool. I remember that we were in the field, and there was a fisherman waiting for the fish at night, and he felt like the fish pulling. He take the line, and there was a bat in the poor bat. And okay, there is a big diversity of species. We have this flying fox in the old world, and we have this species here in the Americas, a tiny bat species. So this group is very diverse in terms of what kind of habitats they live in. We have been studying all the diversity of bat species across Latin America. And here in Venezuela and Colombia, there are some areas in which you can find even 1,020 species of bats in the same place. So this is the area in the Americas with the highest diversity or highest richness of bat species. I like this one. This is Centurio senex, and it eats fruits. This is a male. They have these white spots here because apparently that's attractive to the females. And this face, somebody has a clue about why they have this form in the face? No? Okay. That's because they usually are like hanging, and when they eat the fruits, all the juices of the fruits are going to fall, and this allows them don't like breathe or inspire the liquids, the juices. This is the Vampirum spectrum. I don't like the name because it's not a vampire bat. They don't eat blood. They are carnivorous bats. People compare them with the jaguars or the cougars, the pumas, because they are really rare. They are solitary animals, and they are at the top of the chain, at least in the bat world. They are the biggest bat in all the Chiroptera group in the Americas. But it's not a very big bat like the flying foxes, right? And here, one is eating a lizard. Yeah, so now you can understand this joke. Okay, yeah. Okay, usually when we see the news or we read a paper about bats, they are very linked with diseases. I have been working in this project in which they found the oldest ancestor of the avian flu. It was discovered in Guatemala. The paramyxoviruses are close to the Nipah virus that it was very famous. They even did a movie about Nipah virus in Asia. So a lot of things link emergent diseases to bats. For example, now MERS, that is a disease that was found in camels, also is linked to bats. These are all the family of viruses that has been found in bats. Rhabdovirus are the group of rabies. Most of research has been done in that group of viruses. Coronaviruses is linked to SARS, that was a pandemic like in 2003. Paramyxovirus is Nipah, Hendra, and ortho is the flu. So they have a lot of viruses, but also they have a lot of bacteria. These are all the species of bats that were found with some kind of bacteria that could be pathogen to people in different countries here in the Americas. So we can find a lot of bacteria, a lot of viruses on them, but I remember that we never found a sick bat. So they were apparently healthy. We usually have this perception of the pathogens. They are bad, we should remove them. Our lives were better if there were no pathogens, for example. And we even think, or I was thinking, or my mom thinks, that this is more acceptable than having parasites. When I mention parasites, there are two groups. The microparasites, the tiny one that I need a microscope to see them. For example, viruses, fungi, bacteria, or the macroparasites like the ticks, the fleas. Okay. So my second goal here is to change your minds so you are not going to perceive the pathogens as you were thinking. Maybe not like this, but at least you are going to think different about diseases and about parasites. I'm going to pull all the parasites, the macro and the micro, so keep that in mind. Okay. What's the role of parasites in the ecosystem? And I'm going to mention some parasites in bats, so you can be thinking on them. This is a juvenile male of Desmos rotundus, the vampire bat, with some injuries. They fight a lot. They are very territorial. There is one male with 25 females in the group, and they fight for the females and for the area. And this one was in very good healthy, apparently. I'm veterinarian, and there were a group of veterinarians, and my specialty is wildlife, so it apparently was very healthy. But it has a lot of like kissing bugs around him a lot. They indeed, even when they have a lot of ectoparasites, they look very healthy. I did mention that this was juvenile because the testicles were really tiny, and it's very evident when they are mature male. So you are going to be experts in bats after this talk, I hope. And one of the benefits of the parasites in nature is to remove the weak animals. This is a picture of a colleague in Mexico. These are a kind of lice. And this bat eats insects, and it was also apparently healthy. This is a kind of worm in which the fly put the eggs into the skin. The worm open a tiny, tiny injury and lives inside. So it has three these worms in the skin. And again, it was a picture from a fruit bat in the Philippines from a colleague, and the bat was very healthy. So what if the parasite killed the host? The parasite is going to die also, because in this case, these tiny worms are eating the fluids. And here they are eating the blood. So they need a host that is alive. This is another picture. This is from our fieldwork in Guatemala. And this was a mouse with a huge Cuterebra worm living inside it. And again, it needs the mice living, right? So what if the parasite kills the host? If the host is dead, then the parasite is going to be dead also. So they don't want to kill the host. They co-evolve. There are some, I'm going to do an exception here, and this is the only report we know that exists. I know the researcher. And this is a parasite that is specific of a species of snails. This species of snail was critically endangered, so the Zoo of London collect the last population in nature and put them in a fish cage. So they were raising these snails there. And then, because of the stress of temperature, for example, there was a rise in the number of parasites, and the parasites killed the host. So, but it's the only evidence that we have, and we know that the population of snails was really small at that moment, but for different circumstances. But usually, parasites only kill the host if it's not the original host. For example, if there is a jump to another host that is not the natural one. Another benefits of parasites is that they remove the predators. For example, I remember that when I was in the school, my teachers told me that the jaguar was the predator in the Americas. They kill otter cats, they kill crocodiles, they kill anacondas, and they even eat the turtles. And the turtles are a very special group because usually when they are adults, they don't have the predators. So the jaguars kill and eat everything below them. So they are the top of the food chain, apparently, right? And then we know that there are some bat species that eat blood. For example, here there is a tiny Desmodus in the back of this deer looking for food. And we know for some evidences that vampire bats can eat on or can feed on jaguars, so they can transmit rabies. Rabies is a very common disease on bats. They have rabies in the saliva, and they are healthy with rabies. They develop rabies, the symptoms, only if they are babies when they are infected. But if they are old, they are resistant to rabies. So what if there is a bat eating or biting a jaguar? The jaguar is going to be infected of rabies, and then there is not going to be more jaguar. And then all the other animals below the jaguar are going to receive benefits. So apparently the diseases that can remove some of the predators can have some effects in the rest of the chain. So the jaguar is not anymore the top predator. The top predator are the diseases. And that's very easy to me to understand if we think that humans are the top the predators in nature. But the predator that really can kill thousands of humans are diseases. Okay. Another service of parasites to ecosystem is that they can regulate the number of individuals. They can control populations. Bats can live, depending on the species and the environment, between 10 and 40 years. And they have a very complex immune system. And they are very resistant to parasites. Indeed, there is a research, a study in which they inoculate rabies, that is the most mortal of all diseases. If you receive an injection of rabies, there is 100% sure that you are going to die. There are 6 exceptions, but there are some questions about that. And then bats can survive. If they are adult bats, they can survive rabies. And they also have here some ticks. I guess that we found 20 ticks in this vampire bat. And this is, I don't know, but maybe equivalent that if I have like a guinea pig here sucking for blood. This is a very huge parasite for the poor bat. Okay. Bats are an exception to the rule in terms of how long they live. For example, if we have an elephant, if I say that they live 60 years, that's fine. Mice, they can survive like 2 years. And when we draw a line, we expect that bats survive like 3 years, but no, they are an exception to the rule, and they live more than what they should. If they were humans, they should survive around 500 years. They have 1 baby per year, and the baby is as big as a 6-year-old kid when they have the baby. At the moment of the part, I don't know how to say that. And the babies develop very fast. They can fly 1 year after they are born. There are nurseries. This is very weird in nature. That's not usual. And this means that all the mothers put the babies in one place, in one corner in the cave. So there is going to be one mother that is going to feed the babies, even if the babies are not from that mother. And usually that doesn't occur in nature. And because she was not hunting, there is going to be another mother that is going to come and is going to feed this other mother. They are very altruist. So, for example, the Smodus rotundus, the vampire bat, when there is one of the bats that is sick or injured or is a mother in the nursery and cannot go to collect food, there are other bats that come and put like vomit blood into the mouth of the other bat. So that is also weird in nature. We don't expect to see that in other animals. Okay. So also they live in the roofs. They are the only animals that do that. And I remember that we collect some dead bats that were hanging. So they don't need to do any effort to do this when they are in the roof, they perching, when they are in the roof. So indeed they need to invest some energy to open the hands. So because they are living in the roofs, there are not a lot of the predators for them, like a fox or a cat. It's very hard to to reduce the populations in nature. They are really resistant to diseases, to the predators. They live a lot. So why there are not so many bats? And that's because diseases can kill most of the babies the first year. So thanks to the diseases, we don't have like a pest of bats everywhere. Diseases also are engineers in the nature. I'm going to give this example. I didn't find an example in bats, but this is rinderpest. This was or is a virus that was affecting Africa, and it was common in livestock. And the livestock transmitted the virus to the wild deers and the other herbivores, and so because there were no more herbivores at that time, there were more grass. There was more grass, and in the summer, in the dry season, in Africa, the fires, the wildfires are common. The fires were bigger than expected, bigger than the previous years. So the trees were removed for the fire. So diseases, just the presence of a disease changed completely the landscape. There were no more, the few trees that were there, they were gone. Finally, parasites regulate the food webs. I have this nice example. This is a snail. Usually snails don't want to be killed for the predator, and so to survive, they look for the dark areas. But there is a parasite that need for some stage to be in the snails and for the other stage in the predator, birds. And when the snail has this parasite, it's not going to look for the dark areas anymore. It's going to look for the light. They call it positive tropism. And so the rates of depredation are going to increase. So thanks to the parasite, this guy is eating. This is something very similar. There is a parasite that needs to have babies. It needs to be in this animal. And to grow up, it needs to be in one stage in snails, in another stage in frogs. And something cool is that when the parasite is in the tadpoles, it's going to be here, and it's going to produce some chemicals to change the hormones. This frog is going to have several legs. And that's going to make this frog more susceptible to depredation. So he's happy with parasites. So parasites are really important in nature, and they have a strong impact in the food webs. The final example of how parasites impact in the food webs is with toxoplasma. Toxoplasma is a disease that usually is linked to pregnant women and is found in mice or in cats, because for some stage it needs to be in mice, and for other stage to reproduce it needs to be in the cats. But I remember that when I was in the first year of the university, I was thinking, why a parasite wants to be in these two guys if this one wants to be as far as possible of the other stage? So when there are plenty good level of parasites, some parasites are going to move to the brain, and the behavior of the mice is going to change, and it's going to be fearless to the cats. For example, the mice usually they don't see very well, and they need to touch the walls with the mustache to know that the wall is closed. But when they have the parasites, they cross the room. So it's easier. Okay. This is a study developed for one of my teachers in the PhD, Marcela Aldana, in Chile. And she was looking for diseases in fish, for some parasites in fish. And she compared areas with a lot of disturbance, a lot of perturbation. For example, areas with a lot of tourism and wild areas. And she found more parasites in areas that were more wild. So people is proposing, you cannot see that here, but they are proposing that parasites can be like indicator of ecosystem health. And that's what we expect in a very healthy ecosystem. Parasites are good. But what about an ecosystem that is with perturbation? I'm going to provide a couple of examples, and I'm going to include chikungunya. First, we expect this in the wild. This is a a bat species that is found in the tropics in Latin America. They look like cotton, and they live under the leaves of the banana banana trees. What they do is that they cut these areas so the leaves is going to fall, the walls of the leaves are going to fall, and they can live here like 6 days. They then are going to look for another leaf. So they need an area with a lot of these tree species, right? But what if I change the landscape? I'm going to lose those species. So diseases emerge when we change something in the habitat of the species due to habitat loss or pollution, for example. I like this cartoon because it explains exactly what is happening with emergent diseases. For example, here there is the bear, and he has been living in this forest. Then we cut the forest, we develop an urban area, and we, the people, we are going to think that, wow, this is an emergent animal, and maybe it has been here before us. That's the example of Lyme disease. That's not an emergent disease. That's an ancient disease. The issue is that we have been entering in wild areas. And that's happening. That's not a cartoon. I have this, going back to the bats, I have a cool example because this species, you say that only 3 species of bats they eat blood. That's true. I only know this one. The other 2 are very rare. Even if you work a lot in the most wild areas, they are, the populations are very small of the other 2 species. This one can eat in a lot of prey, but the other ones, for example, one of the other pamper bats, they eat in a specific group of birds. Okay, animals with feathers. Okay. For example, the smallest, some studies show that they can eat snakes, iguanas, these animals, and amphibians, and turtles, for example. There are some research in which they inoculated rabies in these animals, and they didn't develop these symptoms. But if we think in the mammals, they are susceptible to the rabies virus. So in nature, mammals are not the most dominant in the landscape. Usually, at least in an ecosystem that has no perturbation. But this is what we see currently, that we change the entire habitat, so we are going to provide more prey to the bumper bats, and due to that, we are going to find more animals that are going to acquire rabies. We have been doing research on that, and we found that only with changing the vegetation, we can explain the presence of rabies in different areas. And now I'm going to introduce you to the dilution effect term. And this is what we see in the nature. When I have an animal that is infected, for example, wild beast that is sick, I expect that that's going to be the most easy prey to the lions. When I have a sick bat, this is going to be the most easy to kill bat also. These kind of toads, they eat everything in the nature, so they remove the sick bats. And as you remember, bats cannot infect the toads. So they are providing a service, they are like cleaning the ecosystem. And the problem is when we remove these animals, and in an urban area, for example, there is going to be mammals that are susceptible to bats. This cat has a bat here. And something of concern is that if I see a bat in my house, maybe that's normal. But if, for example, in the Americas, if I see a bat in a day, that's dangerous. Because the bats that we have in this continent, they fly at night. Usually, the bats, if I enter into a cave, they are going to fly. They are going to go away. But if I found a bat that doesn't have fear, maybe that bat is sick. So those bats that do not fly, that they walk, that they do not have fear, that they are at the day, maybe they have rabies. So we don't need to touch. We should not to touch them. And usually they do that. Okay. So we call it the amplifiers to those animals that if they are present in the ecosystem, instead of removing the disease, they are going to increase the probabilities of diseases. So when there is land use change, some bats are going to live more close to us. I have this example. We have a forest with different species of bats, like those cotton bats that I showed you, the white ones. But if I remove the forest, I'm going to change the ecosystem. And if I put some houses and some people, I'm going to change the ecosystem. Some of the bats do not like or do not support these changes. But there are going to be others that they say, I can survive here. And they are going to increase the population because there are no more competition. And we are going to increase the rates of or the risk of rabies in the system. My thesis was with this bat, Tadarira brasiliensis. It has a naked tail. They live from Canada to South Chile, and they eat insects. Okay, if I have a colony here of bats of this species, all of them are adults. Could somebody tell me how many of these bats are going to be sick of rabies? None? Who else? Two. Okay. Wow. Almost. Very close. It's very rare to find rabies on them. The problem is when you look for those that have rabies and you touch them. So the risk increases. I don't know why, but in Latin America, when you find a bat, people used to put them to smoke. Okay, so even when there is the risk of finding sick bat with rabies is very low, if you increase the number of bats, the probabilities or the number of infected bats also are going to increase. This case was in South Carolina, was a report from the CDC, and this was a house in which there was a lady who loved bats, and she always leave them to live in the house, even when it was very easy to remove them. One way to remove them was to put light here, because they don't like the light. They have a lot of oil in the hair, so you can see these spots here. And she was walking under this area, and she got rabies because bats to generate the echolocation, they generate also some tiny drops of saliva, and rabies is in the saliva. So I remember one research from Dr. Konstantin, he was a heavyweight in rabies in bats, and he heard that some speleologists, these people that likes to go into the caves, they got sick of rabies. And under the interview to the survivors, he asked if they were bite, and they say that not. No one was bite for a bat. So he was thinking in the spits or the aerosol for transmission, and he went to the cave. He put some raccoons and dogs and cats into tiny cages with tiny holes. expecting that no bats can bite through the cage. And some days later, the animals resulted positive to rabies. So that was the confirmation of rabies by tiny drops of saliva. So if you find a bat, please don't touch it because they can bite you. You cannot see a bite. I don't remember. I guess that the bite is here or like this. So if you touch a bat, please go to the health center to acquire the rabies vaccine. And if you found a bat in your house, maybe it's not sick, maybe it's a juvenile. The juveniles, when they are starting to fly, they used to have difficulty to fly and they can be into the house. Just put a box and release the bat outside the house. And if the bat cannot fly, maybe it is sick, and you need to call to some health agency here. I don't know which one. I remember in Chile, I was doing my PhD in Chile, and there was the first case of rabies in people in Chile. And there was a kid of 6-year-old kid. And I remember that all the young physicians, they say, we don't know what it is. But the old a pediatrician of the mother of the kid, he said, I suspect of rabies. And all the young physicians, they say, no, that's impossible. We don't have rabies here in Chile. And then they collect the brain of the kid because he died, and they found rabies. So rabies is the only disease in which after you are bite, you can have the vaccine, and you are not going to develop the symptoms. And then the mother, like 4 months after the kid was died, she was cleaning the room, and she found a dead bat into the box of the toys of the kid. So maybe you're not going to see the big bites, but be aware of that. Now I'm going to talk briefly about chikungunya. This is something that we just published, and chikungunya is a disease from Africa and Asia. It was not present here like 3 years ago, and chikungunya is a kind of invasive species. Here at the University of Minnesota, I work with the invasive species. And invasive species are those species that are from other side, live here, and they found a fertile soil to spread, everything is perfect, and they increase the population even more or even higher than in the native areas. Okay, now that we have that in mind, we are going to think on mosquitoes as invasive species also. In the Americas, we have Aedes aegypti and Aedes albopictus, and they are very aggressive species of mosquitoes, and they are not native from the Americas. For example, this Aedes is in the t-shirt of a man in Ecuador. This is a picture from my colleague, Daniel Romero, and you can see that it penetrates the clothes. So if you use repellent, please don't only put repellent in the skin. I used to do that. Now I use repellent in the clothes also. And you can see how aggressive is this species. Because here is empty and here is full of blood after a couple of seconds. So this is the potential distribution of Aedes albopictus. Here, Aedes aegypti. They can transmit chikungunya and Zika virus and dengue. And something of our concern is that given that we have all these species of mosquitoes in the Americas, and we have high flow of people, there are some chances or some opportunities to move the diseases also. So we were doing research on that. And we were thinking in people infected as when you think in the migration of animals, movement of people. So we established the amount of people flying between countries potentially infected with chikungunya. This is the situation of chikungunya in September of 2012. This is in August of 2013. It was not present in the Americas, and then it appears in December of 2013 in San Martin here in a tiny island in the Caribbean. And after that, it spread as fire across the Americas. This is San Martin. Apparently, that was the patient zero of chikungunya in the Americas. And from here, we estimated how many people spread it to other countries. And because, for example, Canada had a high amount of people infected, they do not have mosquitoes there, so there were not the same spread of the disease like here, for example. So this is an example of the flow of people from Canada to other countries in the Americas. And you can see that Canada do not have direct connection of flights to Chile, for example. You need to go to the US for most of the flights. And this is an example of the United States. We did this to understand how chikungunya move between the countries. And this is the United States, and each arrow means a flight. So if you are in the United States and you want to go to other countries in the Americas, you need to take only one flight. Only for 2 countries, you need to take 3 flights. For Venezuela, for most of the countries, if you departure from the United States, you need to take 2 flights. And now the interesting thing is in Saint Martin, the area in which the epidemic started, if you departure from San Martin, you need to take 3 flights for to visit most of the countries. So there are more chances of transmission of chikungunya here. And that's what we saw. This is a patient that arrived in a flight in Colombia, and once the patient transmitted the disease to the family, there was an explosion of cases in the country. And we saw the same in Venezuela, in Dominican Republic, and Guadalupe, an exponential growth, a lot of cases in a very short time. So that's what invasive species do. So now that we know about bats, about parasites, and about invasions, I'm going to talk about white-nose syndrome. This is a novel disease here. It has 10 years. This is a very brief presentation about this disease. This is what we see under the epidemics. Carpet of dead bats in the floor of the caves. And usually, we are going to see that these bats are going to be without fat, with a lot of these fungi in the areas without hair. And as I said, maybe they are dead, but they are still hanging. These fungi can be found in the ears, in the wings of the bats. The fungi is very close to other fungi that eat dead plants, for example. And it was found in the winter of 2006 in New York, and the mortalities go from 73 to 100%. It depends on the species. There was a species that was very abundant in some states that now is critical endangered because the rates of mortality for that species is 100%. Most of the caves with that species, if they acquire the fungi, the fungi is going to kill all the individuals in the cave. Now it's found in 30 states in the United States. Apparently, it's native from Europe, and there are some studies infecting with the same fungi from the United States, some bats in Europe, and the bats are healthy. Why? Co-evolution, perfect. So the bats in Europe, they have been living with the fungi that they say, I know you, so I can respond, my body can recognize you. But in the Americas, it's novel, so the body of the bats cannot recognize the parasite. This is what we see. This is a healthy tissue, and this is an infected tissue. And you can see that all this layer of tissue is gone. This here, we should be looking some inflammation, but in this case, there is no inflammation. So the fungi is eating the live animal, and the animal do not respond. The tissue does not respond. So that's very interesting in this case. So I found this joke in Facebook, in my Facebook, and they say that there is a diet for the bats. So you can take this diet. This is the PD is the acronym of the species name, and some of the side effects is death. So that's because the bat, when the bat is being depredated for the fungi, is going to invest some energy to compensate the tissue that is lost or the heat that is lost, and is going to spend all the fat that the bat has to maintain the hibernation. So at the moment, there are some bats that wake up too early, and when they wake up because they are starving, there is only snow. There is only snow. There are some evidences that support the idea of the origin of this fungi in France. They even identified the cave in France because the fungi that is in the US is exactly the same than the fungi in this cave in France. So what they suggest is that this cave received some tourists, and the tourists translocate the disease to North America. Indeed, the cave here is an attraction, and the cave here in New York is the most visited cave in the US. From there, the disease spread. And this is the distribution of the bat species that are in the higher risk of extinction due to this fungi. The Indiana bat is the most endangered at this moment because it's the most susceptible. That was in the winter of 2006, and then it spread faster and faster. And now this is the situation by this month. So this is the origin of the epidemic. Currently, there are some evidences here and here. There are some bats that were dead for this fungi in Minnesota. And there are some reports here also in Washington. Something interesting is that there is a gap between the fungi reports in both areas in this country, and there is a match between the areas without bats. So there is no disease there, maybe because there is no bats there. Okay, so this is the map of the number of species in the US. We developed a tool to understand why this invasion from Europe to the US was so successful, and we found that this is the distribution in terms of climate, temperature, humidity, rain. Of these are infected bats. The environments used by infected bats in Europe. This is the cave in New York, and from here the fungi has been spread into novel environments. So it's like in the case of the zebra mussels. The fungi arrive here to a fertile soil, and everything is perfect. Even if the environment is different to Europe, it's very suitable for the fungi. So our novel discovery now, or proposal is that we collected information from the current distribution here and here of the fungi, and our question is that given that the fungi is above the Tropic of Cancer, what if we move the fungi in the Tropic of Capricorn? What do you think that is going to happen if I have bats here? Can survive? Let's see. Okay. We collect information about the environmental conditions in which I found the fungi here and here, And we identify if such conditions exist here. So we made the projection, the modeling, and we found this. There are a lot of conditions here in Chile, in Uruguay, and Argentina that are suitable for the fungi. So conditions exist. If I'm a researcher and I'm going to work here with bats, I should not move to Chile with the same clothes or shoes, for example. There are some studies showing that in the shoes, they isolated the fungi. And here in Chile, we have some species that also hibernate for a shorter time, but they hibernate. So we found that the disease is not in ecological equilibrium. Sadly, this means that the disease is going to keep spreading here in the US. There is one treatment, maybe not treatment. This is a bacteria, and they put the bacteria in some infected bats, and then they release the bats because the bats were healthy in Missouri. This bacteria was developed to kill some fungi in the fruits. The idea was to keep fruits surviving for more time in the stores. And then they applied this bacteria to bats, and they discovered that the bacteria kills the fungi. Something nice is that kills the fungi. Something not nice is that it's not a treatment. I mean, if I'm a bat and I'm already sick, it's not going to recover me. It's going to kill the fungi, okay? So some message to take home is that bats are good for the ecosystems. Parasites are good for ecosystems. We are going to have novel diseases if we disturbance or the environment, for example, with habitat loss or species invasion. And thank you.
Thank you so much. We'll take questions from the audience if that's all right with you. Let's see. Raise your hand if you do have a question. You may have been so thorough that you have answered most of our questions. Here, right up here. I'll be right there.
I have one question. I forgot the pronunciation of the disease you talked about. Something. What? Chikungunya.
Chikungunya, yes.
What are the symptoms to that, I guess?
Chikungunya is a disease that was found in Africa and in a village with people. Macondo is this tribute of people. And the meaning of the word in Macondo means that makes you twist. And that's because the pain is so high that people cannot even stand up or things like that. And they compare the pain with advanced arthritis. And so you are going to, if you are infected, around 6 days later, you are going to have headache, fever, and then a lot of pain in the joints. And this pain can last for 3 years. Yeah, it's very nasty.
What can I just ask? Maybe if you could connect the research that you've done with bats and how that carries over to aquatic invasive species and fish diseases, which is what you're currently involved with at the University of Minnesota as a postdoctoral research associate, correct?
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah, the idea is that we have been trying to understand why the Whitenose syndrome is a very good survivor here, is dominating the complete landscape, as it's changing all the community of bats in the United States. So we use that tools to apply to a disease that is affecting fish. There is a disease in fish that generates a lot of hemorrhage, bleeding across the fish, inside and outside the fish. Is from Denmark, is from Europe, but was discovered in Denmark. And from some reason, it appeared here in New York. Currently, the last report for Minnesota is in Lake Superior, and is devastating, is killing a high number of species, native and invasive species of fish here. So we are using these tools to understand invasions and the spread of diseases, but we're applying that to lakes. Yes.
Since currently in the United States, the disease and the bat are not in equilibrium, do you think that there's something that humans are obligated to do because we brought the disease from Europe over, or is this something that we just are going to let nature take its course and the species that are fit survive and those that are not die out? Is there an answer to that? Is there an ethical or a community attitude towards that?
Thanks for the question. Good question. In my opinion, I remember that when I was studying my master in wildlife management, one of the questions was, what if I found a chicken that fall from the nest? Should I take it again into the nest? And the answer was no. Let the nature keep the course, as you said. But in this case, in which apparently was due to human intervention, I guess that the best idea is to try to solve it. There is one NGO, the Nature Conservancy, and they made a huge artificial cave. And at the moment, that was a kind of joke, because why a cave? And then they move a lot of bats, healthy bats there, and now that cave is a model, and they are curing a lot of bats there, and they have a healthy colony of these bats that are critical in danger now, thanks to the white-nose syndrome. And it's one huge effort to maintain that population. Apparently, if we do not do an intervention, the Indiana bat is going to disappear. The reduction is too fast. There are not comparison with other species. In a couple of years, the number of individuals was like 50%. That's too fast. Yes.
Thank you. I was going to say, I don't know. I feel like that the information that you've given us is so dense and so rich that no, this is good. That I like almost my brain is just taking all of that in. Is there any last question we got one right here.
If it looks like we're going to lose some of our most common bat species, little brown bat, for example, Myota species here, which are very important to our ecosystem, are there related species in Europe that are resistant? Is there anybody talking about if they completely die out, is there any talk about trying to introduce the resistant species from Europe to fill that ecological role?
Good point. I guess that if we are without bats, that's going to be one option. There was, I guess that it was in Kansas maybe. They were using a lot of pesticides for the crops because the insects, they have a very high reproduction rate. They were having a lot of babies, and the babies were resistant to the pesticides. So when they were flying and putting the pesticides in the insects, they found that the insects were resistant, and the bats started to eat resistant insects with the pesticides. So a lot of bats started to die. And then they noticed that once the population of bats fall, the pesticides were not doing anything. The real control was developed for the bats. So I guess that the first people that is going to move if bats disappear are going to be the farmers. Like in the case of bees, for example. We use a lot the bees because even if we have a greenhouse, we put bees inside just to develop a role. I guess that we are going to do that if bats disappear here. But I never hear that currently in the community. Yeah, thank you.
Good evening, and back to the original discussion you had about snails in London that are now extinct. Is anybody doing anything about those poor creatures?
No. Yeah.
Not that we're aware of.
Yeah, that was, I remember that the person that was working with that species, and he said that there was the last single individual, and he had that individual in his hand, And he said he felt that like power, like he was very sad, saying, "Wow, I have in my hand the entire species." Yeah, it's very sad. Even if it's a snail, it's very sad. Yes.
We have time for one more question right up here.
Thank you. I was wondering about the transmission of chikungunya. You showed that it was transmitted by mosquitoes initially, but then is it after that transmissible person to person or by aerosol, or is it only if one mosquito bites an infected person and then goes to another person? How is it transmitted after the mosquito?
To my knowledge, only is a vector-borne disease. It needs mosquitoes. But there is another disease, Zika virus, that is like a hot topic now. We are writing proposals to that because when there is an emergent disease, everybody wants to pay to understand that. Zika virus is now the hot topic. And in the case of Zika virus, there are sexual transmission, but for chikungunya, there is no evidences of transmission, even if both are transmitted by mosquitoes, by the same species of mosquitoes.
So in the case of chikungunya, you're saying that an infected person is bitten and then that virus is transmitted that way?
Yes,
Okay.
yes. They are very different diseases because, for example, one mosquito can infect, I don't know, like 700 people of chikungunya. But in the case of Zika virus, it could be like around 10, for example. The rates of transmission between both viruses are very different. The burden of chikungunya was very dramatic, but Zika virus is like more slow, even if the same mosquito is the species that is transmitting the disease. So don't go to Brazil for the Olympics.
Thank you for, one more question up in the front. We can squeeze it in.
Are you saying that the Zika virus then is transmitted from person to person? Once one person has it, can give it to another person without a mosquito?
Yes. There is an article in the New England Journal of Medicine saying that. And there were some about that journal, because that journal is a very prestigious journal in diseases. They also confirm that Zika virus is developing this damage in the babies, the microcephaly. Yeah, so this is people is saying that it's worse than chikungunya for the long-term effects. Yes.
Well, on that on that note, thank you so much for being here. Dr. Luis Escobar, let's give him a huge hand. We just got back from Guatemala a few days ago. Thank you for making this one of your first stops back in the States.